The previous 4 parts of this history of the Peckforton Light Railway have described how the railway has evolved and developed since its inception in 2004 until 2020. Through those years, you will have seen that the prime motivation for me in devising the PLR has been to create an entire narrow-gauge railway system and operate it as if it were a real railway, serving the communities along the foot of the Peckforton Hills in Cheshire, where I have proposed that the railway might have been constructed. We have now reached 2021. During the year, I ran several full operating sessions, which I have portrayed in videos posted on YouTube. One of these explained how I actually manage a full operating session, taking the viewer through the way in which I, as a lone operator, sequence the running of several trains and try and simulate how movements might have occurred through a single day's operation of the railway. In 2021, I improved the coding for the freight management program on my Scion Pocket computer, which I have devised to try and simulate the goods movements on the railway. I also created a similar system in Google Sheets to run on my mobile phone, but unfortunately the screen buttons were far too small for my clumsy fingers to operate. It is my belief that I could never have achieved the precise level of control and slow running I require without having a fleet of battery-powered locomotives. I have tried using track power for several years, but found it to be unreliable and erratic in an outdoor environment, and have never regretted converting all my locos to battery power, which I have written about extensively on my blog. However, from time to time I will run live steam locos on my railway, usually when someone such as Zach Bond comes visiting, as he did in September. I get the impression there is very little about steam-powered locomotives which Zach doesn't know. He says that driving live steam locos on my railway is challenging, but somehow he always manages to get his manually operated locos to run at realistic speeds up and down the stiff gradients on my line. My one concession to live steam power is my Regner Challenger locomotive. It too is manually operated, but I find its geared mechanism readily copes with the tight curves and deliberate and somewhat accidental undulations on my railway. However, it does confirm for me that trying to run a full operating session realistically using live steam would be a bit of a nightmare. I'd prefer to focus on reasonably prototypical movements of goods and passengers during my running sessions rather than nursemaiding locomotives. For me, the locos and rolling stock are the means to the end rather than an end in themselves. Which brings us to new developments in rolling stock in 2021. 2 new locomotives have joined the roster. The first, a Naysmith & Wilson 044 tank, which is based on 2 locomotives which ran on the Skull and Skibbereen Railway. This loco started life as an off-the-shelf Linton and Barnstable Baldwin locomotive produced by Bachmann. I was given an opportunity to buy it from a fellow modeller who was disposing of a deceased friend's stock. At first I converted it to battery power and ran it in its original form, with the intention of modifying it slightly to look more like a 3-foot gauge locomotive rather than a scale-compromised 2-foot gauge loco. However, I was really disappointed with its performance. It simply didn't have enough power to pull even a modest train up my gradients. I figured that the mechanism was at fault, and after a fair few trials and tribulations, I redesigned the motor block and got it working. I decided to investigate whether there was a native 3-foot gauge loco which could make use of a motor block with outside frames and fly cranks. I really liked the Skull and Skibbereen Naysmith & Wilson loco, but it didn't have outside frames, whereas another Skull loco had outside frames but a far less attractive body. So I merged the 2 together, and loco number 21 Broxton has now joined the fleet. As you can see, she's now quite a powerful loco, certainly a lot more powerful than the Bachmann Lynn on which she was based. The new motor block casing and Loco body were drawn in Tinkercad and 3D printed. My first home-produced, scratch-built, 3D printed Loco. Meanwhile, a couple of fellow modelers, reading about my struggles with the Bachmann mechanism, had sent me redundant Bachmann-Lin motor blocks, which they hoped I might be able to cannibalize. So I looked around for another Loco, which could make use of an outside-framed motor block, and came across the really attractive Kerr Stewart Locos, which served the waterworks at Kew, just outside London. The body was drawn in Tinkercad and, with very few modifications needed to make it fit the chassis, Loco number 23 Bunbury came into fruition. I was able to give her a few test runs, and although she has not yet had a chance to participate in a full running session, I'm very pleased with her performance. The fact that Bachmann completely redesigned the motor block for the Lin suggests that they had realised they'd made a major technical error with the original motor block. I still have the makings for another Lin chassis, and so, who knows, 2022 may see yet another outside-framed Loco joining the fleet. A minor development in 2021 is the addition of a second motor and mechanism to the 3D printed double-ended diesel Loco, which I constructed last year. This, now more or less, doubles its hauling capabilities. I haven't yet figured out how to add a sound card to this Loco, but if it's possible to add sound to OO and even N-scale Locos, it surely can't be difficult to add sound to this model. As anyone who has read my blog or watched my videos will know, freight handling is one of my greatest pleasures. I now have constructed or bashed sufficient rolling stock to fill all my storage sidings, but some of my wagons were built several years ago, when the prime focus was on quantity rather than quality. The acquisition of a 3D printer and the skills to draw my own rolling stock with Tinkercad means I can now turn out dozens of wagons with relative ease. I have now drawn files needed for several different Southwold Railway wagons, and tried them out during operating sessions this year. It could well be that during 2022 more realistic 3D printed wagons will slowly replace my earlier attempts at producing goods rolling stock. Another 6-wheeled Clemenson Southwold Railway coach has joined the fleet, and the parts have been printed out to create a third. There seems to have been a national shortage of Bachmann 21.5mm diameter metal wheels, which I use, and so I'm having to wait before I can put the last coach into service. Using the knowledge gained from making the Southwold coaches, I have now constructed one of the Southwold 6-wheeled open wagons. It's then relatively easy for me to modify the drawings to produce the slight variations on design which featured on the line. I have also produced a 3D printed luggage van, based loosely on those which ran on the County Donegal railways. Lacking any drawings, I based it on photos. I think it's actually a bit smaller than it should be, so maybe next year I'll rescale it. This is one of the joys of 3D printing. It's relatively easy to remedy mistakes, particularly in terms of scale. As a consequence of producing the 6-wheeled rolling stock, I discovered I needed to smooth out a couple of unwanted dips in the track, one at Beeston Castle and the other at Bukeley. It was relatively easy to sort out the track at Beeston Castle. The dips were raised with various pieces of tile, slate and stone, and then the track was reballasted to fill the void. However, at Bukeley the dip was too deep for this method, and so the track was removed and the concrete breeze blocks which form the foundation for the railway were lifted and re-levelled. The track was then relaid and reballasted. The 6-wheelers now pass over these two sections without any of the problems they encountered previously. The points leading to the storage sidings in the lean-to and garage are tricky to reach, and so I decided it was time to find ways of operating them remotely. For the lean-to, I used point rodding. Rather than push-pull, the rods are twisted to keep things simple. In the garage, I opted for servos, controlled with cheap servo testers. Life is now a lot simpler when getting the stock in and out of the storage roads. At Peckforton, a new siding has been added, so more goods stock can be accommodated. As space here is very tight, the siding was added to the front edge of the slabs on which the station sits. The level crossing gates, which I designed and printed out last year, have now been fixed into place on the approach to Peckforton station, together with line-side fencing which I acquired on eBay. I've decided to leave these items out all year to see how they cope with the climate in this northwest corner of the United Kingdom. In the workshop, I have recently acquired another 3D printer, an Anycubic resin printer. I'm really impressed with the finer quality of finish it achieves compared with filament printing. As you can see, the maker's plates on the left are resin printed compared with filament printing on the right. Those letters are about 1 millimeter tall. And finally, nestled amongst stories of strange-shaped vegetables and leaping dogs, Peckforton Light Railway was featured as a small item in our local BBC North West news broadcast.
And this is what I've been up to during lockdown.
And we'll finish with Rick in Cheshire, who's been getting creative in his garden with this small-scale 1920s gauge railway. Lockdown productivity at its finest. Ian Haslam, BBC North West Tonight.
That's brilliant. More next week, whatever's been bringing you joy, vegetables or otherwise. Let us know, nwt@bbc.co.uk. You can email us, send us a video ideally, or a picture as you saw in Ian's report. Right, on to the weather.
And so, despite various lockdowns and restrictions, the tiny world I have created has been quite productive this year. But what will next year bring? Here's just a brief glimpse of what might yet be to come.